right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Jessica, your RE Director of Religious Exploration for Children and Youth, and today I'm here dressed in purposeful colors. It may look like spring colors, but they're actually representative of the transgender pride flag, the blue, the pink, and the white, which you also see represented there in the trans-inclusive, or the inclusive flag over here with the pink, blue, and white there. So pink is supposed to signify, of course, that who identifies more as female, blue more as male, and the white being neutral or gender binary. So, and those color schemes were created in the year 2000 by a woman named Monica in, I think, Virginia, who actually gave us the transgender pride flag. So before that didn't even exist. So today is a Veterans Day of sorts. So a day when we celebrate the lives and the impact of some of the most courageous and outrageous people in our world, the population of people who have existed since the beginning of recorded time, although we don't always acknowledge them in our textbooks or even in our stories told throughout history. But there are people like Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known as Elagabalus, who was a Roman emperor from 218 to 222 BC, an emperor who reportedly wore makeup and wigs and preferred to be called a lady and not a lord, and who supposedly offered half his Roman Empire to any physician who could make him a woman. So this has existed through all of time. There's also historical mythical deities like Cupid, drop back your bow, right? You know Cupid, the god of desire, erotic love, attraction, and affection. And did you know that Cupid is the being that is the offspring of Hermes and Aphrodite? And who's ever heard of the term hermaphrodite? Hermaphrodite is also an intersex individual, and being the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, we get the word hermaphrodite. So we see in even Greek mythology that we have a term that describes a gender variant person. So Cupid has no gender, and how cool is it that we also celebrate Valentine's Day with a gender diverse character? Isn't that awesome, right? Who knew? I did, but now you do too. So there are leaders like Wewa, a Zuni two-spirited individual who took on duties as a Native American cultural ambassador to the United States during the turn of the 19th and 20th century. In the indigenous community, two-spirited individuals were gifted and honored persons because they carried two spirits with them, both female and male. They were often the healers, the medicine people, the visionaries, celebrated in their cultures for being different. Many cultures in history have held gender diverse people in reverence and in admiration. Such are the Hijra of India, who are actually designated a third gender, the Fa'afafine in Samoa. There's also the Mahu in Hawaii, who were celebrated by their people until the colonizers came and thought that they were blasphemous, and they tried to push them away. But there's many around the world and many examples throughout the world of people who were gender diverse. There were also pioneers like Dora Richter of Germany, or Lily Ebert, who you might have heard of, portrayed in the movie The Danish Girl. Has anybody ever seen that movie, The Danish Girl? Excellent film. I encourage you to go look it up and find it. It's an excellent film. And it tells the story of Lily Ebert, who was one of the first people to have surgery to become her affirmed gender. There was also Alan Hart, radiologist, who pioneered X-ray machines. Christine, so who didn't know that our modern X-ray machine was actually pioneered by a gender diverse person, right? Christine Jorgensen, famous in the 1950s as the GI becomes a blonde beauty. There's the headlines right up there on the screen. You can see that there. And you can imagine what that meant to a world that didn't have the internet and that didn't have anything except, you know, periodicals and such. And so many people who were gender diverse at the time felt alone until they saw somebody like this on their newsreels before their movies, when they'd go to the movies and to see them in the paper. So there's also Michael Dillon, who's a British doctor. These are all men and women who, in modern recorded history, became some of the very first transgender people to undergo surgeries and treatments to become fully realized in their affirmed gender identity. There's also courageous women like Marsha P. Johnson, a black transgender rights activist whose work through the 1960s and 70s had a profound impact on the LGBTQ+ community. She and her friend Sylvia Rivera were arrested at the birth of what we now call the American Gay Liberation Movement at a place called, and maybe some of you have heard of this, the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, so in New York. Some say in the trans community that this entire movement for LGBTQ plus equality started with a pair of drag queens. So there's also trailblazers like Reed Erickson, whose philanthropic work contributed millions of dollars to the early LGBTQ movement of the 1970s. Renee Richards, a trans woman, American ophthalmologist, and professional tennis player who fought to compete as a woman in the 1976 US Open and won. There she is, featured there. So when you hear this argument that trans people shouldn't play, you know, in the sports with their affirmed gender, it's all a bunch of hooey. So there's also Chaz Bono, the only child of Sonny and Cher, outed as a lesbian, but later came out as transgender. He's been a role model for many trans men, wrote a book, made a documentary movie on his life story, and even competed on Dancing with the Stars, proving that even trans people like myself can dance. So, for sure. Many of us know about Laverne Cox. She's an African-American actress and LGBTQ plus advocate who is also the first openly transgender woman to win a daytime Emmy. She appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 2014 with the headline, "The Transgender Tipping Point, America's Next Civil Rights Frontier." And there you can see the Time magazine, one of the first times we've seen a trans woman on the cover of Time magazine. We've also seen Christine Jorgensen on that cover. So she holds a mirror to our society and supports our rights to be authentic to ourselves. Then there's Caitlyn Jenner. I was waiting for some boos. Okay, she may not be popular these days because of her politics, yes, because of her, but whose transition served as a catalyst for many trans-identified individuals in the 21st century. So, formerly Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn's public transition made the word transgender known to everyone all over the world. She wasn't just Bruce Jenner, the man on the Wheaties box, the Adonis of a man, you know, the Olympian heartthrob, but that wacky dad on the Kardashians that became a woman. So her transition sparked conversation between all generations all over America about what it means to be transgender. Parents were like, what? That's Bruce Jenner? And kids were like, so what? You know, so it was really interesting to see how the generations were able to find conversation. So like her or not, she is one of the catalysts of our modern world that really brought this out to the forefront and made this word something that people recognized. Very much like Christine Jorgensen did in the 1950s for the community. Then there's this young girl who's close to my heart, Jazz Jennings, a young girl whose parents allowed her to live her authentic self after she communicated to her mom and dad at a young age that she wasn't a boy, that she preferred pink sippy cups and dresses. She made headlines as one of the youngest trans-identified kids when she appeared with Riley Gaines on 2020 with Barbara Walters, and there we have the family there, Jeanette Jennings and her kids and the twins. So, you know, the jazz show I Am Jazz on Lifetime gave hope to many trans youth all over the world. I can't tell you how much that she has really impacted. And Jazz Jennings stands on the shoulders of the people who came before her. She has a fascination with older trans individuals like myself because it lets her see herself in the future, because she didn't see herself in the future as a little child. You know, so speaking of Jazz, I remember specifically when I met that family. Jazz was 5 years old when I met her, and her mom, Jeanette, having met me, said to me that I had given her hope. Because up until that moment in time, she was concerned about the future of her child. After meeting me, she realized that Jazz could have what many might call a normal life. A life with friends, a life with family, with work and happiness. My story wasn't the transgender sob story she'd often heard in the media. So yes, even Jessica Lam, yep, that's me. I just discovered that people often refer to me by my full name. So they don't just call me Jessica, they say Jessica Lam. I've come to find this out recently, so I thought that was kind of funny. I came out during a time when it wasn't popular or even heard of at the end of the 20th century. There wasn't even a trans community while I was growing up. We weren't so visible acceptance as sensationalized tabloid talk shows, or as comedic relief on television shows or movies, shows like Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks, remember that one? Tootsie, you know, with Dustin Hoffman, who actually, I always say, if you want to win an Academy Award in Hollywood, just portray a trans person on the screen, right? Trans America, Felicity Huffman, Some Like It Hot. I always say, you know, because it's always cisgender people playing these transgender roles, what if we had an actual trans person who was portraying these roles? What would that mean? So that's why today, you know, we celebrate Trans Day of Visibility, so we can acknowledge for those people who are out. So in 2007, just around the time that Jazz was on 2020, I was invited to appear on the Larry King live show with my children. If you're interested in seeing the video, just Google Jessica Lam and Larry King. I pop right up, and you'll see my kids when they were in their teens. They were about, I think, 15 and 16 when they were on the show with me. I decided, after a conversation with my kids, to be visible, to show the world that we were just like everyone else. We struggle, we persevere, we are your neighbor. Like any person you might have met in the street, you might have come shopping in my store one day, didn't even realize I was transgender. Typical American family, doing our best to make it day to day, despite extraordinary circumstances. And I give thanks every day to my family. Family who are always there for me, who may not have understood me or understood why I was doing what I was doing and just trying to be myself. But they proved to me unconditional love. Proved to me that people are capable of it. They didn't ask for a transgender kid. They got one, and they decided to stand by me. Now, you won't see them waving a pride flag in front of the house or anything, but they love me. I'm a part of their lives. You know, it would have been easier for them to just dismiss me and just say, you know, you're not welcome in our house anymore. But they didn't, so they're my superheroes. And people like you who approach me and say, hi, Jessica, how are you doing? And acknowledge me for who I am, you're superheroes to me. And you can be for many trans individuals that you meet. Because we are parents, we're family members, we're your coworkers, your neighbors, your RE Director of Children and Youth. Most of all, we're your friends and acquaintances, your coworkers, and the people that you meet each day. Yes. We are a diverse community representing all racial and ethnic backgrounds as well as faith traditions. Yes, you will see a gender diverse person in all kinds of faiths. From Jewish synagogues to Buddhist temples to Christian churches, they're there. And the International Transgender Day of Visibility, also TDOV, is an annual day of recognition celebrated around the world on today, which happens to be Easter as well, March 31st, which is dedicated to celebrating the accomplishments and victories of transgender and gender-expansive people, while simultaneously raising awareness of the work that is still needed to combat discrimination and violence. So TDOV was founded in 2009. So we've been celebrating this day for about over a decade now, and it's as much needed day of recognizing our transgender and gender-expansive loved ones, given that a minority of Americans say they personally know someone who's transgender. The vast majority of the public learns about trans people, guess from where? The media. So whatever the media is feeding them is what they're getting about this community. And there's a problem with that, because much of the media today has overwhelmingly shown misrepresented, mischaracterized, and stereotyped trans people since the invention of film. D.W. Griffith, back in 1914, had a film that portrayed a transgender-like character who was seen as like a villain in the movie, and was sort of seen in a very negative light. And so we start in film with these negative portrayals, and we've seen this all throughout. I invite you to watch the documentary Disclosure. It's produced by Laverne Cox, and there you have Disclosure, and there's another one called Visibility. Visible, out on TV. That one's on Apple TV. For more exploration on how history has often portrayed the gender diverse community and how it's caused harm to the public consciousness about the transgender people. So I encourage you to please snap a picture of that Disclosure, Visibility when you have time. You can stream those either on Netflix or on Apple TV. So while we've made significant progress in recent years, with more visibility than ever before, we are still fighting for basic human rights for the community. The state of lawmaking right now against the trans community is frightening, especially here in the state of Florida. But there's hope, and I hold on to hope. As there's been a spark ignited with our youth today, there's a trans community whose voices are united and loud, louder than I've ever heard them, because when I was growing up, there was not a trans community who was loud. We were hiding. We were in the shadows. We were not visible back then. There's also lawmakers out there trying to make a difference, like our current president. Whether popular or not, on March 30, 2023, our president, Joseph R. Biden Jr., issued a proclamation designating March 31st as the official Transgender Day of Visibility, calling upon all Americans to join together in lifting up the lives and voices of transgender people throughout the nation and to work to eliminate violence and discrimination against all transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. As a person trans-identified, to hear a president say that, and even in his State of the Union address, he even mentioned transgender people, we support you. That's something that you don't hear often from our leaders. In this proclamation, our current president states, and I quote, these are his words, "The Transgender Day of Visibility celebrates the joy, strength, and absolute courage of some of the bravest people I know. People who have too often had to put their jobs, relationships, and lives on the line just to be their true selves. Today, we show millions of transgender and non-binary Americans that we see them. They belong. They should be treated with dignity and with respect. Their courage has given countless others strength, but no one should have to be brave just to be themselves. Every American deserves that freedom." He further states that transgender Americans shape our nation's soul, proudly serving in the military, curing deadly diseases, holding elected office, running thriving businesses, fighting for justice, raising families, and much, much more. As kids, they deserve what every child deserves: the chance to learn in a safe and supportive school, to develop meaningful friendships, and to live openly and honestly. As adults, they deserve the same rights that enjoyed by every American, including equal access to health care, housing, jobs, the chance to age with grace as senior citizens, as I'm going to be learning in the next couple years. But today, too many transgender Americans are still denied those rights and freedoms. I'm afraid sometimes to just walk into the emergency room because I don't know what kind of treatment I'm going to get depending on who's sitting there and what kind of political affiliation they might have. A wave of discriminatory state laws is targeting transgender youth, terrifying families, and hurting kids who are not hurting anyone. An epidemic of violence against transgender women and girls, in particular women of color. Many have taken their lives too soon. We have in November the Transgender Day of Remembrance. That is our Memorial Day, where we remember those people who have been killed from hate crimes, from violence, just for being themselves. So that's why we take today the Transgender Day of Visibility, to celebrate those of us who are visible and who are still here. Those were some great words given from our president, and I hope that they ring true through every part of our government and for future generations. We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. It's why my community celebrates the Transgender Day of Visibility. So I hope that today and every other day after today, when you meet a gender diverse individual, you give them a hug. You let them know how much you value them for their courage, their perseverance, their honesty in being true and authentic. How many of us can raise our hands and say that we're true and authentic all the time? And if you can, you might have cisgender privilege. Also use their preferred pronoun. How hard is that? Sometimes that will save a life. When somebody tells you who they are, they mean who they say they are. So by you acknowledging them by their proper pronoun or addressing them by the name they have chosen, honors them and affirms them. You wouldn't want somebody using a different name for you, right? You wouldn't want somebody misgendering you and calling you a different pronoun, right? They want the same thing, and they've given it some thought. Most of all, I want you to use your cisgender privilege to speak up and support them, because yes, there is such a thing called cisgender privilege. If you've never had to question why you have the right for proper health care, or if you've never had to say, these are my pronouns, right? People just assume. I want you to consider that your voice is heard loudly and that you, when you become the change you want to see the world, you make a difference. Don't put up with someone misgendering another or speaking harshly about the things they don't know or understand. So educate others, as I've educated you today in these brief 15 minutes that I'm with you, sharing you this information. I want you also to encourage others to vote and pass laws to protect the rights of everyone. Everyone. So I want you to be a trans ally. Please consider being a trans ally and help to make a difference in the lives of gender diverse persons. You know, sometimes a trans person might feel unsafe going into a restroom where they feel comfortable in, and if you see somebody that may feel a little hesitant, would you like me to accompany you into the restroom? You know, I had a news crew did that for me once. I was in downtown Miami at the commission's office when we were trying to get a law passed for the bathroom bill. And I had an opposition on the other side who was trying to speak all these horrible things, that all trans people were pedophiles and invalids. And, you know, I think many of you may know that I used to be a Christian minister in the 1990s. I left my church as I transitioned and went through a divorce. And the man who was sitting on the opposing side as I was in front of the commissioners of Miami-Dade County, our government officials, was my former pastor speaking really horrible things about our community. I don't think he even realized who I was standing on the other side, and I was genuinely afraid for my own safety that day. And seeing the fear in my eyes, a news crew saw me and said, "Do you mind if we take a camera with you to go use the restroom?" And I'm like, "Sure, you know, don't worry, we're not going to follow you into a stall. We just want to show what that experience is like for you." So they took a camera and they followed me to the restroom. I went in, they saw me close the door of the stall, came out, washed my hands, left out, "How's everything? Everything is great." And then the news reporter says, "Nothing wrong here, you know, somebody just using the restroom." And so it was really powerful. So, you know, I want you to think about that too. So those are some of the ways you can be a trans ally. So on behalf of the gender expansive community, I thank you. Thank you for your understanding. Thank you for your love, your support. Thank you for being you. So does visibility and representation really lead to cultural acceptance? I hope so. Happy Transgender Day of Visibility, folks.